A lot has happened since the end of V3. We've gotten quite a lot of things going on. A lot of very talented people have been joining the Discord and engaging in discussions and making stuff, and it's really cool. The name of the V4 update is the community update, because a lot of people are helping out with this thing. V1 and V2 were pretty much me working on stuff by myself. V3, a lot of people were helping with routing stuff once I started streaming, and now V4 people are helping with not only the routing, but the actual materials that go into the routing, which is super helpful, and I'm very appreciative that people are helping out. We're going to start out with a history of our goal setting. The original goal was to just finish the run and prove it's possible to actually get 100% in the game in a single segment. After the first run, we were like, well, this was fun and all, but it takes way too long. Like, it's a logistical nightmare to stream this thing. So our stretch goal was to be able to fit it into a weekend. That way it's easier to get the people together that we need. And then my stretch goal since like the beginning of this has been to try to get the run to fit into a single day. Like, that to me was like the point where the run is accessible. So this takes so long to transition. Wow. So version 1, we had Borth Todd. Here he is. This was our first character on our first run, which was all the way back in 2017. Took about 2 months for me to route, and the focus was simply to finish the run at whatever the cost. We weren't expecting it to be performed well, we just wanted to prove the concept. And then the outcome was that we did it. We actually managed to do it. To be honest, didn't know 100% if it would be possible or not, but it took a whopping 79 hours, and man, a lot of that was just pure execution and routing errors. And then we had Kirkland Crimson Chin III for V2, looks like this. 3 years later, approximately. The goal originally was to get under 55 hours, because that was like saving at least a day off of the first run. And then the focus was to do this by making the route materials more accessible, because if you guys recall from V1, a lot of the pain and suffering was like not knowing where things were, or like instructions were vague. This is what the original guide looked like. This is what we used for V1. As you can see, the formatting is awful. I used Courier New like it was a play. You have no distinguishing, like, spatially where the instructions and the labels begin. This is like what the investing circuit was. It was like, hey, go to each NPC with no instruction on where they are or how to find them or what they look like or anything, and invest in each of those people and do all this extra stuff. This looks awful, and it caused a lot of problems in V1. And here's the rework. It's got better spacing to show where sections of the route are. It's got formatting. It has color coding, so like NPCs are green, spells are yellow. We added maps, we added labeling systems. There's one fundamental problem, which was that quests, their instructions were not written here. They were actually on a separate document, and you had to hop back and forth between them. In general, this is more pleasant to look at, and you can actually tell what you're supposed to do for the most part. The outcome was that the route was very easy to understand. However, the actual gameplay was tedious and suboptimal. And then the final time ended up being way better than we expected. 39 hours, 27 minutes. Our goal was to get under 55 hours, but we ended up saving almost 40 hours, 201% faster. Moving on to version 3, we had Keith DeBaby Ledger as our character. This happened very recently. And the goal for this one was to get under 30 hours. We want to save like about 12 hours this time. The focus was to heavily optimize the actual route logic this time. The materials are almost entirely the same. I mean, there's a few things like the investing circuit got a little bit of an overhaul, but overall it's almost the same. And the outcome of this is that we ran into something I wasn't expecting. The route was so efficient that actually interacting with and managing the route materials was the bottleneck of our progress at certain points. The biggest example was during the investing circuit. You have 3 people that are each doing a different task, right? And you have like, okay, we're going to go here to this location. So Zach says, okay, Ben, go to the Imperial Office of Commerce. He's like, when you're in there, bribe her to buy this house and read this skill book. Mal hears Zach say that, and they go, okay, I'm going to go check these things off. But there's like 2 things listed, and Mal's not looking at the document. Mal's looking at the checklist. They have to remember everything Zach's saying, and I have to remember everything Zach's saying, but it can get confusing because by the time Mal finds where in the massive like wall of checklisting stuff this would exist, they've already forgotten probably what Zach said about the first thing. And then like it just becomes this backlog of like way too much overlap. Like Zach's already moved on, I've already moved on, or Zach gets behind on something, or I mishear what Zach said as an instruction because I heard Zach verify something to Mal. You can see how this quickly gets out of hand. So this is the focus, is that the route materials are becoming obsolete, which is a super bizarre problem to have, but an interesting challenge. So the outcome of this one was a time of 21 hours, 47 minutes, 22 seconds. This is the current record, and we saved 17 hours and 40 minutes, way more than I thought we would. Again, we thought we'd get about 30 hours. So it was 181% faster. So here's a summary of everything we just discussed here. We have V1, V2, and V3. You can see we always massively improve beyond what our estimate was or our goal. This is a transition. Here's some notes of what people said in the room as we were running this. The route was clear and easy to follow. There were no major setbacks this time. In V3, the only major setback was the internet technical difficulties, which cost us about 40 minutes of time. Han Butthead, longtime viewer, he is the first person, to my knowledge, that has completed the 100% route and did it using the V3 documentation. As far as splits go, the map exploration and the random skill books were far and away the two worst splits. The goal I want to set this time is sub 16. It's super ambitious, but we really don't know how much time load warping is going to save. And our focus, so we went route and materials and route. So this time it's going to be materials. Oh, wow. That one's incredible. This is our live split timer. This is the more important info to be looking at right now. It's like the tutorial took 11 minutes in V2 and then it took 7 minutes in V3, that kind of thing. And you can see the time difference here and then our total running improvement throughout the route. There's some key things to point out here. In V2, the investing circuit took 2 hours. With the new map that lists everything in order, this took 1 hour and 15 minutes. But here's the crazy part. We lost 30 minutes during this part to the internet outage issues. So we saved a little under an hour, but we could have saved like 1.5 hours feasibly. The map exploration, despite just being labeled better, managed to save 48 minutes, right? That's just a testament to how important the materials are. We saved 2 hours and 40 minutes on the side quests by having better route logic. Of course, the skill grind, we saved 7 hours and 40 minutes with the infinite level up glitch. The map and the random skill books, these are the ones that we thought were the worst ones of the whole run, and I can illustrate this. You can see the map exploration, when you visually see how long each part is, it dwarfs every other task in the entire game. And there's a few reasons for this. One, the map's really big. It's just a large objective to achieve. But a big issue with it is we haven't actually updated how you explore the map hardly at all since version 1. It's always just been, here's all the locations on the map, go find them all, haha. The Nirnroute took 20 hours on V1, so 6 hours of map didn't feel too bad. Map exploration is a huge issue now suddenly because everything else got better so much faster around it. I wanted to show you everything that goes into a time save because it's more than you would think. So the route logic and the execution of that logic you would think is all that goes into the time save, but as we've been seeing throughout the data we've been looking at here, the communication of that route, which is like how the materials tell you to do the things in the route logic, is equally if not more important than what you're actually doing for a run this long and complicated. We're finally at a point where the communication is clear enough that we can focus more heavily on another part of it, which is the material interaction, which up to this point has been very minimal. These are the 4 like components that go into saving time. We have the route execution, which I've used another unnecessary 3-dimensional graph to demonstrate this. This graphic shows that practice and memorization and learning other routes can all help strengthen your understanding of how to execute the thing. Expansion on how the route logic works. Everything and anything people can think of, it gets put in this giant document that has all of these suggestions, and we vet each one during this research and brainstorm phase, and we throw all of that into a testing phase where we make sure, okay, this didn't work, check that off, we're not using that. This could work, let's put it in for further testing. And like we synthesize all of this into a new rough outline for what we think the route could be and how it would work. And then the nuance comes from an iterative process of just playing through the route and like testing all of the new things over and over, seeing what worked. So this is the current ideas that have potential for V4. You know, there's a lot of things to test. The brainstorming and testing phase takes a long time. And it's better to do all this now than to get towards the end and then realize, oh, we should have tested becoming a vampire to get skill boosts that we don't need to farm anymore. Like, what if we test that at the end and it turned out it worked and I have to go and remake the entire route built around that? Yeah, okay, rat skip's on the agenda, guys. We're going to make rat skip happen. Mark my words. Okay, so we've pointlessly examined the ontology of how thinking about something and doing it works to make a thing. So now we can move on and go to a more in-depth graphic that actually shows you useful information. So we've talked about the document, the 7 pages of ideas, and we have this idea of RNG manipulation that I'm just mentioning this here in case someone super technically minded is in chat or watching this on YouTube. If anyone would like to try to figure out how RNG manipulation works with us, it would save us a lot of headaches. Okay, so we have horse vectors, which are being worked on by Just a Fat Yeti, and then we have Nirnroute Remapping, which is being done by Whatha. I will get into those in a second. Load warping's the big tech to improve the route logic. It's going to fundamentally change how this works. So all you need to know is that these are 2 separate characters. So like this one, I just named it Other Guy, Orc. Remember all that info. In the beginning of the tutorial, hasn't even gotten the first tutorial pop-up. And then this is our, just like another character, female high elf, completely different character, has already done quests and stuff. Let's say I want to warp the orc into this building. All I have to do is press E and escape like this and get that sound. And then whichever save file I load is the character that ends up in the next room. So if I load save 210, Other Guy with all of his save data gets put through the door to the other side like this. So now I'm in here. The tutorial message just popped up. You'll see I'm an orc, I'm Other Guy. I don't have any quests done yet. I haven't left the tutorial in the game's mind yet. Here I am. This is not a very useful application of this glitch, but what this demonstrates is any character can be anywhere you've already been. You get to the end of a cave, a quest update saying return to the Fighters Guild. You can just load warp directly back to the Fighters Guild and save like a minute and a half of backtracking. And then also Lex is working on optimal attribute allocation and money grinding, like spreadsheet information that has been mathed out, and now we know the absolute best way to get the most level ups to therefore get the most training. We got to level like 170 in V3, and we can get to 190, 5 levels of training per level, and you get 20 extra levels. You're all looking at that and you're thinking, I want to know more about the horse vectors. As you recall, the map is awful to explore. It is very large. Here they all are. And this isn't even counting the random gates. There's even more for random gates. So there is a ton to tackle here, and it took us 5.5 hours to get through this whole thing. And that's with like a movement speed glitch and stuff to go decently fast. But you die fall damage a lot. There's a lot of trying to get up hills and stuff that you can't jump up. So there's a known glitch. I'm not going to perform it, but basically I prayed at a way shrine. It shot a buff at me. I sidestepped it, and the buff hit my horse. So my horse is now enchanted with a way shrine buff. It makes your horse get a speed boost, and speed boosts on horses are massively scaled compared to humans. So a 5-point speed boost to a horse does this. So now we move crazy fast. My theory that I had was, so if I want to get to Dive Rock, and I know it's exactly northeast of here, you would create a series of horse vectors where you say, okay, because the horse has tank controls. If I hold right, I'm not moving, I'm just purely rotating, right? So I can say, okay, hard snap to this coordinate by fast traveling here. Point exactly like northeast by lining your horse up, get like some exact position, and then just like hold up, and then like let the game auto hold up. Looking does not steer your horse. As you can see, it's straight no matter where the camera's angled. So you hold up and you don't even think, and the horse can just canvas the map through this series of scan lines that go through everything. And if you get stuck, you would just kind of wiggle left and right like this to kind of scale the thing. And it doesn't have to be super precise. You're probably thinking, wouldn't you have to take like the whole map and you'd have to chart like every single location in the game as an XY coordinate, and then you'd have to have like, because they can be discovered by being near them, not exactly on them, so you'd have to have like a series of radii around each point for where they can be discovered, and then for every fast travel snap point, you would have to have every single compass vector direction, and then those would extend all the way out to the edges of the map, and then you'd have to write down, okay, so this vector from this position has these other circles it intersects with. You'd have to take all of that info for every possible vector at every possible location. And on top of that, you'd also probably have to have exclusionary zones. Horses are really slow in water, so you'd want to avoid water. You can't go through the Imperial City, so this Imperial City, you'd have to have a zone that the vectors can't run into. You'd have to take all this information and you'd have to chart it out. So that's what you'd have to do, and Yeti already did it. So he's super smart. He just wrote a program. It did the whole thing. We got all the data data thrown into it. He calculated it with a super fast computer. This is an early screenshot of this. I couldn't find the latest one, but this isn't even the best version of this. This shows you every single vector that is required to canvas the whole map, and we're going to, on stream, be vetting these, where Yeti is using the program to spit out a vector. It tells us where to go and where to look. And then in-game, we try to run that vector and we say that vector did or didn't work the way it was intended. And we get all of that information. And every time we tell the program that vector was not good, it gives us a second vector it recommends. And basically you go from the most locations possible for the vector to the least. So like the first vector is probably like one of these diagonals that picks up like 10 locations. Like maybe after all this isn't the best way to do it. Maybe this was just the funniest way to do it or something. Like maybe the traveling salesman thing would be good, but then you'd have to take all this data again and do a traveling salesman algorithm. And so Yeti went and did that as well. So we have two options now, and he has a way to make a hybrid, and we can basically make a single thing that you do on a horse the whole time to touch every location with traveling salesman paths and vectors. Hopefully this will cut down the map exploration significantly. Huge thank you to Justifat Yeti for putting in so much time to get this figured out. In the past, this is what the Nirnroute map has looked like. There's a few problems with this map. WhatHub pointed out, like, why are we going from 1 to 2 when 1 and 2 are so far away that this travel distance is like unnecessary? We already have the whole map explored before doing Nirnroute. Why are we not fast traveling to the convenient locations? And on top of that, the map doesn't look like the in-game map, so it's not congruent with what you're actually doing. So WhatHub took like a map mod and is taking screenshots and stitched it all together. So what we have here is this is me quickly drawing over his map for demonstration purposes. Basically, his map has more precise like pin style locations for the Nirnroute, and it has icons that have the most relevant location to fast travel to. So the way I would think to do this is you have a line going here and you have dashed lines to denote fast travel, so that the map is entirely self-explanatory and you'd have text for the name of each location for your fast traveling. So we've talked about execution of the route and the logic, but we have the communication and the interaction with the actual materials that we've yet to discuss. V3 has a few issues with the way the route is communicated to the player. The current overworld map is a little complicated. This is the current map we use. The gate system is horrifically complicated. Pink means it's a fixed gate that's always there. A fixed pink gate gives you 1 fame, but a fixed pink gate with a green plus gives you 2 fame. So the fame is already denoted by 2 separate marking systems. You know, you have like 2 layers of circles here with like a symbol. So it's like, okay, so pink means location that is a gate that's always there, and blue means it's a location you have to do an additional objective, so I have to look at the guide to get that thing. And then the asterisk means I can't roll the gate location layout again, so I should just go straight into the gate. Like, that's a lot of things to have to parse out all at once. It should be more intuitive. New players are still potentially alienated by having to open a wide variety of files. Yeah, so someone in chat already mentioned this. It's overwhelming to open it all up and be like, okay, I have like 6 different things I have to figure out how they work before I can start. I want it to be more plug and play, like you go to the guide and you can just start and not have to prepare anything. And then things like dialogue text. So dialogue looks like this right now, but instructions also look like this. So it's confusing. So here's a proposed way to improve it. Dialogue would be shown very obviously a different type of instruction rather than blending in with other instructions. This is the material interaction phase, which is largely an undeveloped concept within the route materials. They're largely static. So you have the guide. It's just like there's links you can click on. They lead to like videos that give you help and stuff, but largely the guide is just like, here's a bunch of text and all you can do is read it. I wanted things like a collapsible paragraph or like, you know, certain things that can make it a little more interactive. Largely, that's just not possible with Google Docs. Physical documents were printed out to reduce the number of windows open on the Copilot's computer. So this is a thing that we do that isn't required. We have so many documents we have to cycle around that we printed out the guide, we printed out the Nirnroute book, we printed out a bunch of stuff so that we don't have to like keep cycling around all the different windows on our dual monitors. Here's a summary of the problems. Because the text is not dynamic in any way, a new runner is given too little information and a speedrunner is given slightly too much information. Because the speedrunner doesn't need the most verbose stuff, they need the bullet points, but a new runner needs explanations on what they're doing and how it's working and why. So we need to like have the guide be able to adapt without me having to make 2 versions of the guide. Yeah, so info recall is tricky. You basically need a little cheat sheet to keep track of when to stop doing certain things, and this is just not sustainable with load warping because we're gonna have like hundreds of saves, as I mentioned earlier. reading an objective in the guide and having to go find it in the checklist to check it off. It's the core fundamental issue with the way the route materials work. Why is Zach reading something and tells me to do it and then checks it off with a pen, and then Mal goes and finds it again in the checklist and checks it off on the checklist? They both had to check it off. That's two people doing the same thing. That's just not a good workflow. Here's the very exciting thing. We have a solution, and it's a solution that I've been thinking about since V2. An interactive website would make this so much better, because a website can do anything. It's dynamic. Even basic stuff like collapsing a paragraph can't do it in Google Docs. The idea of it is that it would house all the route materials in an accessible place, so a new runner doesn't get bombarded with links to like 40 documents they have to analyze and learn and study. It has everything you need, and it guides you through it automatically. It's intuitive, and new runners can immediately plug and play. In the V3 VOD, I was like, yeah, I've been trying to figure out how to do web design stuff so I can make a web page that checks all the stuff off. Like an hour later in the run, Ultra Potassium joins our chat and says, I have a prototype whipped up that you can check out. Ultra Potassium has been working on a prototype, and the emphasis of the website prototype is rapidly getting the feature set achieved so people can start using it now, like a V4 solution. Here's the main feature, inline checkboxing. This eliminates that redundancy. So the whole thing's interconnected now instead of being completely disjointed and redundant. So Zach will be like, oh, okay, here you go, and he'll check it off. So the tutorial's checked off. If I uncheck the tutorial and I go back to the speedrun guide, now it is unchecked. So these are all inherently linked and will display throughout the whole guide. There's a database behind this that has all of this info stored. It's really nice. It has like the maps and stuff, and this is a pretty good, dare I say, amazing solution to already have this quickly. Like obviously there's a few small things, like maybe the map could be over here instead of here, like some formatting stuff, but the core functionality, Zach or whoever's co-piloting can just go boom, 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 click all these off, go over to the checklist, and they're done. Save file number tracking is critical for load warping. This is a thing that he went and implemented that I hadn't even thought of yet. In the original guide, it says load your permakey save, and we look at the cheat sheet that we physically write down, but now you don't need a cheat sheet. Save 2 is the permakey save. There it is again. So they're linked now. You can change it here and see it updating over there. And there's a few other features. Player progress is imported and exported. You know what sucks? Having to go into a new tab and read everything in a completely separate environment. He made it so you just click and bam, the Boris info's over here. Someone said this as a joke, but someone said you should have text-to-speech co-piloting that reads you the instructions. 30 minutes later, he's like, it's in. You enable speech, and like this lets you pick which text you're being read. So like if you want to read this, hopefully this
Time
works.
starts as soon as you click continue on the first tutorial box that appears.
Now you don't even need a co-pilot. Ultra Potassium is working on a potential way to make it so that you can have your own URL extension like at the top of the thing. /PRCLive would be like our custom one that people can tune in and watch our iteration of progress being checked off as it goes. Huge thank you to Ultra Potassium for making this and for continuing to work on this. Prototype 2 is the one I'm working on. It's a prototype that focuses on the user interface aspect. The goal is to present the feature set in a different way and compare my approach versus Potassium. So this is using Vue and Vuetify, which do so much heavy lifting that it looks like I made a slick web page, but it did like all the work for me, and I just plugged in data into containers. So if I hover Flare, it shows Flare over in the corner. I don't have information filled out about Flare because I haven't gotten that far, but I did make it so that it situationally displays the object you're hovering over for quick access. So, oh, I want to void warp. Here's all the info on how to void warp. I want to save clip. Oh, here's the video on how to save clip and all of the steps on how to do it. Just from hovering over it, it loads like instantly. It's all stored in a database, and it's pulling that data and showing it. So it's all like a dynamic page. So I've added in like clicking to like that. So you can lock and unlock the viewer, and then you can play the video. Based on what type of object it is, it'll draw the viewfinder to have all the info you need. For example, if I want to display all of the glitches for the glitch reference guide, I don't have to manually update the glitch reference guide anymore. It just goes through the array of every glitch that exists in the database, and it prints them all out one after another. But when it's not hovered, it has this default text. We could plug something else into this. So my goal is to figure out how to plug in the cheat sheet, maps for investing, whatever default information you need could display here when you're not hovered over something. And it'll be based on where you are in the run using the table of contents. This page could have the checklist. This button could go to a map. that, for example, has an HTML canvas on top of an image of a map, and the map automatically hyperlinks all the locations and automatically draws all of the relevant markings for the map. That's what this is doing right now. I didn't manually draw any of this. Or you could have the map in the corner, and like maybe we could eventually resize and drag stuff. Like these are like the long-term goal of the web page. So, oh, that's sick. That's a sick transition. We've checked off the 4 things we're going to talk about, but there's actually 2 other ones that suddenly are now a factor. We now also have routing tools, which in the past, routing tools haven't really existed for this run, and material automation. A good example is the saddling glitch requires you to use the chairs. Like you sit in a chair and you load warp that character somewhere, and where they were sitting in the chair in that room is where they spawn in the coordinates of the new room, if that makes sense. I was like, man, if we just had like every chair in a database, we would be able to see the best chair for each situation. So from Darkhell, who's a really smart programmer, he did the unpatching thing, the load remover, he made that, like all kinds of stuff like that. He made a chair lookup database that he pulled out of the construction set with programming stuff. Now we've slapped that over the top of a spreadsheet, so it shows you the best chair. So you type in the coordinates and then you sort by distance. This bench in Wendir or this chair in Fort Blue Blood that are at these coordinates will spit you out this far from that other point in 3-dimensional space. The webpage database will eventually be a runner logic checking thing that can provide ontological insights. Basically, it can show the interconnectedness of things. So to illustrate my point, imagine I click on an NPC's name in the guide and it shows every split and the instructions within that split they appear in, and shows like, oh, I want to kill Ravenous Polis. Let's see if Ravenous Polis is needed later in the run past this point. This gives me immediate access to verify if something's feasible or not. So imagine being able to see a flowchart as well of every location in the game. Like it would go through the instruction list. Every time a location was mentioned, it takes that location and it counts it, and it makes a tally of all of those locations. And it says, you went into Phintius's bookstore 14 times. So I would go, oh, that sounds like a lot for a bookstore. Maybe there's routing logic potential to like reduce the amount of times we have to go back to his bookstore. So here's the future. Material interaction is interacting with the route materials manually. But what if you didn't have to interact with the guide at all? The true future of the route, several versions out, would be having the actual gameplay be the only focus of the runner and everything around you updates. So the only example of this currently is a really dumb, unintelligent thing that I've implemented in the checklist, where if you check off a quest, it'll check the fame off for you, so you don't have to click on 2 different boxes. Valorant has catapulted 100% into the future with a save file reading program. Valorant, like out of the blue, joins the Discord and says, has anyone tried to make a save file reader? And I'm like, we've talked about it, but no one knows how to do it. And then he's just like, I'll do it. 6 hours later, he's like, okay, it can check like most aspects of the save file. And through the past several days, Valorant's been working very hard on implementing more and more of the save file checker to check more objectives off. Not only does it know how many Nirnroutes you've picked up, it knows which Nirnroutes you've picked up. The map could check off the Nirnroute automatically depending on what the save file has checked off, right? It's insane. And in doing this, Valorant has compiled a ton of data that enhances the backend database for the vision of how the website would work. Now you have all of the reference IDs for all of the Nirnroute, and you can get their exact XYZ coordinates, all the places. It's the same thing with the map markers, like all the gates. We just know everything, basically. This is all the data and the interconnectedness of the data. You know, you got the form ID of a gate with its number and its exact location, whether or not it's a fixed gate, etc. So this is a random save, so it pulls all of the information, like the basic info at the top. It knows you've done this quest. It knows you haven't, like I apparently haven't done the Dark Brotherhood, or I'm like in the middle of the Dark Brotherhood on this save file. It tells me the exact value of my skills. I cannot emphasize it enough. You don't have to check the checklist off. We haven't linked the save reader to the website because neither thing is done enough yet, but we're so close already after less than a month. Huge thank you to Vlarden for putting this much time and effort into figuring it out. This is like a crazy amount of progress. There's been a major discovery. Karsto has been messing around with load warping and found a way to get 7 more fame than we thought the limit was very recently. This is a brand new thing we need to investigate. If you load warp your character into an Oblivion tower after you've already closed all the gates, it doesn't assign you to a specific gate. The game gets tricked into spawning you in some like generic tower that has an additional sigil stone, and when you grab it, you get an extra fame from it. But here's the kicker. We don't know how to definitively prove if this is the maximum amount of fame you can get from this exploit. All we know is that if you do it a second time on the same tower, it doesn't work. Presumably it's 1 per unique type of tower, 7 towers, 7 fame. There's now a decision that has to be made on how we handle this, and part of the way this is going to work is based on testing stuff. There's 2 trains of thought. The simple answer is that having more fame on your save file is more 100% completion, so you should put it in. That seems like a very reasonable answer. However, this opens up a problem. If we later find an infinite source of fame, do we have to backpedal the decision to allow the higher amount of fame and go back to the 198 requirement and then put in a rule saying only fame from the original sources? Because then we have runs that had more progress they needed to achieve than newer runs. We need to lay the law down now before this gets out of hand, basically. I don't think I would count this since it's a glitch and isn't meant to be part of the game. Okay, so that's the second train of thought. Changing maxing finite statistics to maxing all the concrete finite statistics only from their intended sources, and the finiteness would be based on the maximum non-glitched values. This would be like the more future-proofed way of redefining the category definition, because it wouldn't change what we're already doing at all. It would just have a caveat to explain why we're not doing glitched stuff. The future-proofing of the complicated solution would be that the integrity of the category is retained, but the cost is that the requirements are no longer super cut and dry. The thing we've kind of decided is that if we find out that like fame is actually infinite when we previously thought it was finite, fame is one that feels like it's more in the spirit of the run, so getting rid of fame entirely would affect the category profoundly, because you would have an entire thing you used to have to do that you're not doing at all, which completely changes the route. So I think we need some sort of like grandfathering in the previous requirements like system in place, that we don't ever completely remove things that become infinite if it turns out there's a way to do it. And the way to achieve that would be to redefine the finite sources point. So there's a lot to consider. There's validity to both sides. I'm almost exactly in the middle on this. If people would like to be part of a longer arc of this discussion, we'll be talking about it quite a bit on the Discord, I imagine. So a quick recap of everything. We have our 6 categories of route improvement stuff to result in this time save, and these are all the things we talked about. This is a lot for less than a month of working on V4. I guess what people might want to know is which streams are coming up. Horse Vector stream, as soon as Yeti and I can figure out like time zone stuff, we're going to be streaming that. You'll see what Yeti's looking at in the program, and you'll see what I'm looking at in the gameplay. We also have a stream for testing and vetting all the brainstorming stuff. That's going to be like phase 1 of the actual route logic portion. All right, that's everything I wanted to talk about. Hopefully you guys got a lot of insight into what's in store. So special thanks to all of these wonderful people for all of their contributions to everything. And of course, thank you for watching.